Perfect. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for your patience. My name is Tracy, and I'm the founder and author of Her Stories Untold, a global book project that shares different empowering, inspiring stories of women around the globe from all walks of life. The reason this project was created was because I realized that there was so many women out there that have stories to share, journeys that have been taken, but, not really realizing their significance and importance. So this project is open to all women and transgender women around the globe. If you have a story of your, journey of how you came to be whom you are today, please do check out www.herstoriesuntold.com. Now, the purpose of this global book project is to empower, uplift, and inspire other women. Before we begin our talk today, I want to acknowledge that the land on which I live and work is the traditional and unceded territory of the Kwiklut Nation and lies within the shared traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Katsiat, Musqueam, Squamish, Kikit, Stolo First Nations. Thank you. And we have a very special guest today. Introducing here Marcia Naomi Berger. She is a psychotherapist in San Rafael, California, and author of Marriage Meetings for Lasting Love, 30 Minutes a Week to the Relationship You've Always Wanted and Marriage Minded, an A to Z dating guide for lasting love. When employed by the city and the county of San Francisco, Berger held senior level positions in child welfare, alcoholism treatment, and psychiatry. And she served as a lecturer on the clinical faculty at the University of California School of Medicine and as an executive director of Jewish Family and Children's Services of the East Bay. She lives with her husband, David Berger, in Marin County, California. So, welcoming. Hello, how are you today?
Oh, I'm fine, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. How are you?
I am great. Thank you. Thank you. I very appreciate your time for being here today to talk about your book, The Bipolar Therapist. If you're okay, I'm gonna just be reading, the bio to that book to share with the audience. Yeah, so they can have an idea of what this book is about. So, when a sudden onset of manic episodes lands her in a psychiatric ward, what is an established, respected psychotherapist to do? Marcia Naomi Berger, single and 29, has her first psychiatric hospitalization and then two more episodes in the next year and a half. A series of close friends and mentors stand by her through challenges with abusive colleagues, conflicted relationships with men, estrangement from her mother, and confusion about what truly matters. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder, after trying several medications, the answer comes in the form of lithium. Under her doctor's guidance, she excels at a new job in San Francisco General Hospital psychiatric ward. A new patient there recognizes her from their time as patients in another psych ward. During each manic episode, Berger has a delusion that she's about to marry someone. Her therapist, an ex-boyfriend or a current one. Her maternal grandmother, Yetta, a poor Yiddish-speaking immigrant, was abandoned by her husband when she was pregnant with Molly, Berger's mother. In 1913, Yetta spent the rest of her life in a long-term care psychiatric facility. Molly grew up in an orphanage. She was devastated when Berger's father divorced her. The bipolar therapist shares Berger's mental illness story, her conflict about marrying, and her complex relationship with her mother. It's a story of resilience, perseverance, drive, and courage. So amazing. So, my first question to you, Naomi, is why do you want to share your story?
It's an important story to share, and there's a couple of reasons I want to share it. One is that I want people, because there's so much stigma around mental illness, especially schizophrenia, bipolar illness. There's so much stigma around it that people don't usually share their stories. There's a lot of secrecy, and there was a lot for me for a long, long time. And I want people to know that they're not alone. and they're much bigger and more complex than a diagnosis, which is really important because of the stigma. A lot of people get defined by their diagnosis, and that's kind of limiting, and it's terrible for people's self-esteem. And so I want people to know that they can still have a good life, basically, if they are willing to let themselves rise above a diagnosis and take care of it, take the medication, get the therapy, and also move on in your life.
And that's for those are very good points. And I kind of want to maybe if you could expand, what exactly is bipolar? Like, what are we referring to? Just
What are we talking about?
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
yes, bipolar illness involves having more than the usual ups and downs that everybody has in life. In bipolar illness, it reaches a psychotic proportion. So when we have bipolar, we're up to the sky. We can have delusions of grandeur, thinking we have special powers, imagining all kinds of things that are not true. And then the depression, some people cycle. They get high and then they get very low, and very sadly, there's the risk of suicide when people get very depressed. So that's the whole spectrum of manic mania and depression that go with bipolar. Some people have more of one or more of the other. For me, my issues were around manic episodes. So for some people, it's more around the depression. And then for many, it's up and down.
I see. And the manic episodes that you're referring to, they come suddenly? Is that
Hmm.
or
I
is
think you could say suddenly. It probably maybe I'm trying to think about like mine. They might follow something that was stressful.
mm,
So I believe there can be a relationship to what's happening in the environment, and there's also a widespread belief that there is a genetic component to it.
ah, genetic as in, traits maybe from parents,
Right, in the family, yes.
runs in
I
the
have an
family.
uncle who had it, and I have a cousin who may have it combined with some other issues.
I see. That's a those are important points to note. And, you know, in sharing your story, what made you feel the most empowering? And what has happened since the sharing of this your story?
Wow, it's a good question. So the empowering part is finally releasing something that I viewed as a secret that I hardly told anybody about for decades. This happened in my late 20s and early 30s, and people who experienced me having manic episodes knew about it. I did experience a lot of shame and stigma and even harassment at work. I was working in an alcoholism treatment center, and many of my colleagues were therapists also, were counselors. And I know people might expect that if you're a therapist or a counselor, you're going to have a lot of compassion for somebody with mental illness. And I would say that I did, thank God, have a couple of colleagues that were extremely supportive, which really helped me get through because others were not. And I think, people deal with their discomfort around mental illness in different ways, and the stigma is one. And I'm really glad that I also had the support from a couple of my colleagues who were also dear friends.
That support is just really important because I think it's like your community to keep you kind of going. And um, I know you mentioned like a lot of people when they're going through these mental illness or challenges, right? They just stop talking about it, right? Because they don't
Right.
have the stigma attached to it or the stereotype of the judgment, right? So, did you want to talk about like the state of trying to hide? Has there been moments, kind of thing where you're just hiding that aspect of your,
Oh, for sure. I
yeah.
mean, one thing that I want to mention also about the previous question,
Mhm.
that, why would these therapists, trained to be compassionate and understanding, why would they stigmatize and some even harass me?
Wow.
Um, and I sense that what happened is that I crossed a line, that it's okay to be neurotic. Everybody has their stuff. And in this particular environment in the early and mid 1970s, it was a badge of honor for a therapist to be in therapy, for neurotic kind of stuff, not psychosis. So that's what I'm saying. I think I crossed the line, and maybe unconsciously they might have thought, if this could happen to her, and I was a highly respected therapist, I was training other people in this alcoholism treatment center, to do individual therapy and couple and family therapy. So I think they thought unconsciously, the worst offenders, if it could happen to her, it could happen to me.
Mm. So that's what they were in the background kind of thinking and then making those assumptions while they're, interacting or seeing you kind of thing, right? So that's quite a lot to, take it on a daily basis,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I think even in a trained environment, as you mentioned, like people have those challenges and difficult frictions, so I think for normal folks, at home, right, in a general situation where they're dealing with, family members that might have these mental illness and whatnot kind of thing, it must be even that much more further difficult, right?
Yes. Yeah. And you were asking about keeping it a secret. And as you mentioned, as part of your introductory comments,
Mhm.
my next job, I was like, this work environment in the alcoholism treatment center had become pretty toxic for me, because of how my colleagues were responding. Even after I finally got on, took lithium, which was the drug of choice back then. It's not so much now because a lot of people, not me, fortunately, but a lot of people had bad side effects, and now they prescribe other things. But anyway, so I'm in this toxic work environment, and I actually get recruited to work on a psychiatric ward
Mm,
by somebody who has no idea, as far as I know. I had no idea about my psychiatric situation,
mm.
and that was at San Francisco General on the psych ward there, and I kept it a secret from all my colleagues. And I did really well there. I was again, I was training people, and I was also given an honorary clinical faculty appointment at the University of San Francisco Medical School, University of California Medical School in San Francisco. Um, so everything was going just fine there. As long, and I kept it a secret all that time, and I didn't know if people knew or not. And as you also mentioned, one of the patients came in who recognized me from when we were both on the psych ward at a different hospital, and I pretended I didn't know him, and I'm like, I'm a little bit ashamed that I did that. But at the same time, I felt like it was what I had to do to, to survive and thrive in the work environment I was in, because after the way other colleagues had treated me before, um, you know, I didn't know what to expect if these people, if they knew. I didn't know how things would come out after that. So apparently he never told anybody because I found out much later. One of the psychiatrists that I work closely with on the psych ward, um, he endorsed my book. I'll show
Wow,
it in case this is a bipolar therapist, and the
very nice.
subtitle: A Journey from Madness to Love and Meaning. So I asked him to endorse my book. That meant I sent him a copy of the manuscript, um, thinking, who knows what he's going to think. I don't know whether he ever knew this about me or not. If they knew, they didn't tell me. Um, and he did a nice endorsement in the book. It's Francis Liu. And then I asked him, "Did you know?" And he said, I had no idea.
Wow.
So I spent about 4 years there. And as far as I know, nobody knew.
That's amazing, and that really answers that question about, can a therapist with a mental illness really help people? Because the clients have shown through, in such a situation, and I appreciate and thank you for sharing honestly about, your experiences and your emotions that you were going through, being in the psychic ward and seeing him, and then having that moment of doubt because of all the other external behaviors and judgments that were happening. So, I'm very happy that you had the support, whether from your colleagues, the ones that were really good, and then as well as that Francis patient of yours that has endorsed your book. Um, yeah, I think that's such a powerful journey.
Yeah, it was a psychiatrist who endorsed the book.
Oh, it was a psychiatrist. Yeah,
Yeah,
psychiatrist. Yeah,
Francis
sorry,
Lowe. Right. Yeah.
Francis Lowe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just feel powerful because I think at the end of the day, everybody's a human being, right? You're in a position helping others. At the same time, we also have our vulnerabilities and differences and experiencing different situations and state of mind, right? So that's as natural as it is as being a human. Many things can happen all at the same time. What I also wanted to turn your attention to, I'm curious is, was there a particular moment you knew you wanted to share the story publicly? Like, given what you have shared about, for example, what was it like at first finding out about what you were experiencing and then somebody putting the label to it and then understanding what was going on?
It took me a long time to write this book. I started writing a book that was something like this book, but it didn't get very far. Um, Almost 20 years ago. And I started writing about my childhood and how I loved growing up in Rockaway and the beach and how beautiful it was there. And then I'd write about how sad it was that my parents got divorced when I was 13. Um, and somebody in the writing group um, basically was saying, why should anybody want to read this? It's boring. It's nothing unusual here. And that was because I didn't put anything important. Well, I mean, it was important to me, but lots of people's parents get divorced and blah blah blah. Um, so I just something happened and I said I want to write some other books. So I wrote this book. It's called Marriage Meetings for Lasting Love, 30
Wow.
minutes a week to the relationship you've always wanted. Because when my husband and I first got married, it's 36 years now we've been married.
Wow.
Um, when we first got married, we took a class and they told us and one of the ideas, it was just a very short time in the class that they spent talking about the idea of having a weekly marriage meeting with a 4-part simple agenda.
Mm.
And that was the one thing we kept doing that we learned in the class. And we're still doing it after 30, doing about 35 years. We started after we were married for a little while. And it keeps us on track. It's great. You don't hold grudges. You remind each other to appreciate each other, and you coordinate the chores, and you plan your fun dates, and you also deal with issues constructively. So anyway, so I wrote that book, and then I thought time to write a book about dating towards commitment. So I wrote Marriage Minded, an A to Z dating guide for lasting love. For people who want to date constructively rather than somewhat randomly, like I did for a long, long time before I was ready to get married.
I
Um,
Yeah.
anyway, so then what made me finally decide to write this book about the bipolar therapist? Uh, I was ready. I don't know when like what's that moment? I did have, sometimes you do know right at the moment. Um, if I had a moment, I don't remember what it was, but I
It
think it might be partly because I'm matured enough that I am less likely to define myself by what other people think of me or how they judge me. I'm hoping that's true. I still have some of that in me of, writing the book was there were times I thought, well, I don't know if I want to publish this. I might get stigmatized all again. Uh, um, but I'm really glad I did. And writing it, besides my idealistic purpose in helping to increase compassion and understanding and respect for people with a mental illness, and to know that everybody's much bigger than a diagnosis and more complex and can have gifts to offer to the world. I also wrote the book, and let's say I gained a tremendous benefit from writing it, by having like an experience of, um, getting into myself and what I went through, and how I moved along with my life, and eventually, I don't I don't I don't know. I don't want to spoil it for people that read the book, but so pretend you never heard this if you're reading the book. But eventually, I recovered. I no longer have bipolar illness, or at least I haven't for 30 something years,
Wow.
and it's possible. Somebody might say, how can that happen? Because the common wisdom and what most professionals believe is that you never recover from bipolar illness.
Mm.
The best you can do is manage it with medication and therapy, which I did really well for a long time. My career kept going well, as long as I was taking the medicine, and the therapy helped me also with my personal challenges to get past my conflict about marrying. So that's what people think. So they might say, well, how do you know that you really recovered? So I say, okay, so maybe I'm in a 30 something year remission. I
Wow.
mean, that's a joke because the remission doesn't
I,
last
kn-
30.
I know.
It might be 6 months, a year.
But that's so like, like empowering, because the fact that you continue to choose empowerment positivity over the years, as you've just kind of expressed over here. And I find it like it's pretty amazing, like how you mentioned that you kind of overcome the bipolar aspect of, because I think, then this is not to speak on behalf of everybody, of course, but I think generally when it comes to bipolar, it's not a common thing that people understand exactly what it is, and even if they
Right.
they do, there's so many different categories, as shared earlier, right? So different types. So, and then the concept of thinking is just like what you mentioned, the therapist saying that you can only take drugs to manage it or maintain
Mhm.
whatever the status is, right? Kind of thing. So, I guess, how did you overcome that, like, to a state where the remission of 36 years, you
Oh,
know?
that was under the guidance and close supervision of my therapist and
Ah,
a psychiatrist, who was also my therapist, for talking about my life and whatever challenges I was experiencing. And so it's in the book. I don't want to give away
yes, we
everything.
won't have to give it
Uh,
away, guys.
no, I don't
You
want
have
to
to
give,
read the book.
no spoilers. I
No,
already
no,
gave you one. I already gave you one, but again, pretend,
yeah, you're
because I
gonna have
want
to
you to,
read.
I want everybody who reads this book to be the joy of this book. It's like you're with me every step of the way, the ups and the downs and the in-betweens.
That's very true, because I read your book.
Um,
That's what I was in your ups and downs. I was in your family. I was there when you were dating. So, so we're not gonna tell the juicy details, but there was one part that I really love, because earlier you had mentioned, the marriage topics, those books that you've written, right? I navigating as a woman is very challenging, right? So you go through phases, dating people that weren't in alignment. And there was one thing that you had mentioned that, I thought it quickly touch on, was the moral, the codes, they need to be in alignment in order for things to progress. And naturally people gravitate away from things that isn't in default alignment of what they want in life, right? So I think that's important to acknowledge for people as well. So, I think it was very, like, you kinda just push through when things are challenging. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask you if you could tell your younger self anything, what would it be?
Okay, so it would be, as I touched on this earlier, no, don't let other people define you.
Mm,
And recognize that if they are giving you a hard time about, if it's assuming my younger self, if I had been diagnosed with a mental illness, um, is to not let it define you. Know that you have a lot more to contribute to the world. And if people aren't treating you that way, that is their problem, not yours.
I love that, and that should be a daily mantra or something you just stick on the wall, you wake up and see.
Yeah.
I think that's simple and very powerful, and I feel I'm in agreement because when you're young, you're, growing up, teenager into a young woman, you're uncertain, you're still learning about the world, right? And learning a lot about yourself. And then with additional things that happen, like those things you take on kind of thing, and then things that people said even not intentionally, they could shatter a young soul, just grow.
No.
Yeah. So that's a very powerful message for your young self. Um, Now, I think you already kind of touched on this whole writing process has really helped with your healing and transformation journey, right? What was it like? Like, did you feel so relieved? And, like, you know what? I'm just gonna publish The Bipolar Therapist. I'm gonna talk about what happened. Like,
Okay, so Trey, you mentioned you went through the ups and downs with me and all the relationships with my
yes.
mother and the dating relationships, and that's what it was like for me to write the book. I was having the ups and downs, and I think I probably empathized with myself as I was writing it. But I think there were times where I was moved to cry or to laugh different parts. There's some parts in the bipolar therapist that are pretty funny, also. Uh, you know, a certain scene with
That's
my
pretty
mother,
yeah.
blessed memory, where when she becomes a clown, and wants me to become one because she likes to tell me what to do. Uh, uh, so yeah, writing it was like all of the above, ups and downs, and but I kept going. I didn't the first time, like around almost 20 years ago. It was very hard to get to, but something happened over time where then once I was determined, and it's also really helpful to have people I write with. I'm in a couple of writers groups, and knowing that they can handle my story helps me handle it also, because one of the groups is a critique group, where we read each other's material and comment on it.
That's, really beautiful because I do, some frequent questions that do come up is like, how do you keep writing, right? And you just gotta keep writing. There's 2 things that you mentioned earlier that I thought to hit on. The healing part about empathy for yourself, I think that's
Mhm.
very powerful, and
Yeah.
sometimes, I've heard others too share that until it's written out, it's like you didn't have time to reflect what actually happened. Doing
Uh-huh.
doing the life,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, acting the life, right? Experiencing the circumstance, and then when you write it out, you're going back to revisit, which of course, I was reading your book to revisit that situation, and then you begin to you're in a backseat now, right? You're like taking a look at what actually happened rather than that was what happened to me, right? And I thought that was really powerful. And then the other thing that you mentioned about what was the last point you mentioned? You talked about how, like, you have this community of support and just people being able to handle the story itself.
Hmm.
That's also very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And writing it, as you mentioned, like you're in the back seat looking at yourself. I believe that it helps us integrate our experiences as we write a memoir.
Yeah. 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 Because sometimes, yeah, I think it's almost as if, things really did happen in your life, but until you go back to reflect and acknowledge it, it's as if it was somebody else's memory.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes sense, yeah. and then suddenly it's like, you own it, even though it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but that was a part of you, right? Nobody could
Yeah,
take.
I think it helps you own who you are.
Yeah, and I think that's really important too for, I guess, young girls growing up together and, being a woman at any age too, to just own yourself and, being that person that you are sincerely, authentically, right? So,
Right. Yeah, no, especially since we're talking about women,
yeah,
and so many of us are trained to be people pleasers, and we do that for a while, and then who am I? Am I only what this person wants me to be, or that
absolutely.
person wants me to be?
Yeah, and that's so very true because it reminds me of my of a past talk that like these advertisements back then, right? They were geared towards that perception, and then them, about being helpful, doing house chores and duty because that was kind of the stereotype, back then. I think like 40s, 50s, right? Those ads, and then going forward, then you got the 80s where women were voluptuous, sexy, right? Appearing, those kind of images, right? Kind of thing. And then you got like up to speed here. So I think it's so important, once again, to acknowledge and learn who you are and to honor yourself and be authentic to yourself. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
and then, yeah. So, is there any other messages that you have for, I guess, woman people? So what I'm hearing is that I think people are feeling very uncertain because the global situation is very uncertain in their life, right? So how we navigate through life in the past is kind of a different method of doing. Maybe there is no method anymore, right? So, you know, maybe if you could share some steps to help push through when fear is holding you back. Yeah.
Wow. Steps to push through what's all okay. All right. First, recognize the fear. That's part of it, is own the fear. Otherwise, we go on automatic.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it wasn't fear of the world. It was fear of marrying and failing at it, like my maternal predecessors. Were very disappointed, and owning the fear, it took me a long time to own the fear. And but once I did, then I could recognize my pattern, and then I could look at it objectively enough, with the help of some therapy and mentors also in that area. And that was my personal example of how, over time and with the will to do it, I overcame my conflict about marrying. Not everybody does. And I think a lot of it has to do with, well, first of all, recognizing it. And second, maybe, I don't know what the order is, first or second, but uh, recognize if you have the will to do something about it. Not everybody does, you
I
know.
see.
But if somebody wants to get over it, wants to, maybe that is the first step, to want to, and then how am I getting in my way, and what can I do differently, and
Mm.
where can I get help?
That's those are very, very good clear steps. So just kind of summarizing what I've heard so far is like the first step is acknowledging that fear, like talk to that fear, right? Because knowing what that fear is, then you
Right.
know what tools to use, right? Which is then the next step that you take, right? And then after that, you can begin to navigate those through those different circumstances. And just backtracking a little bit, you talked about the fear for your experiences about marriage because of our predecessors having, having a not so ideal experience.
Yeah, they were basically both abandoned.
And I kind of want to expand on that a little bit. And I just, I was reading your book and I felt really, really tremendously sad that and it's not to fault, men in general, that type of situation, but in those circumstances, someone becomes a father and or a husband or a partner to someone, and then they have a child, right? And then they walk away from the family, right? And then because of the, I guess, the circumstances and the stereotype of what a gender role of a woman should be, she stays there thinking that it's a phase that, the men will go through, and then once they
Yeah,
get through that
come
phase,
back.
they'll come back, and then they wait for them and hope and continue to hope. And then in the whole entire process, they're taking care of children themselves, right? And then trying to navigate the system. And when there's so much things going on there, you were talking about the will, right? Where is that will going to come from when all your energy and everything in your mind is, trying to hold this all together and deal with the situation kind of thing, right? So I just think I respect and I think women are just so powerful. And yeah, so I just feel very sad. So that's why, I always say that it's really much like the parents have a lot of influence and impact and shape to the children and what happens in that social conditioning to affect them the next generation and then the next generation, right? So the fact
Right.
that somebody chooses to walk away, right? They're also, I don't know what else is going on, you know?
Yes. As I'm listening to you, Trey,
Yeah.
I was realizing that I did have some advantages that my maternal predecessors did not have. You know, my mother grew up in an orphanage. She didn't have the kind of guidance you get from seeing a wholesome relationship between parents, or even having one parent, with unconditional love, living with her all that time, because her mother was in an institution and she was in an orphanage. So I had a mother with me. And I also had a father who did not abandon me in the sense that my mother or my grandmother were or felt abandoned. But he took my sister and me out. He'd come to our house and drive us uh, a little ways to a restaurant in Brooklyn from Rockaways in Queens, where I grew up. Would go to a restaurant in Brooklyn and every week. So he was not out of my life. He was there. It was far from perfect because he remarried and he had a child who I'm actually I get along with quite well now. But I had, he was there for me, and when I had need for a father, and because of whatever's going on in my life, I could talk to him, and he would be supportive. So I did have those advantages that probably helped me. My mother had a very strong will. She didn't have the education about marriage, but she moved along and she got a master's degree and she became a physical education teacher, and loved her career. So I think the strong will, I don't know if that's something you inherit or you pick up from people you grow up with, but I just wonder if, people might say that I was persevering or tenacious or, those kind of words. Uh, and I wonder if that could be because I had that kind of a mother.
I think just, thinking back to the book and what you're sharing now, I think absolutely there are traces of us, because it makes me reflect about my situation and other stories that people have shared with me. Absolutely. We take strength, and that's a beauty, right? Like we take strengths where we can see it may not be the perfect version that we're seeking for, the exact, but we take each piece and then we build us. We build our own, right?
That's a nice way to put it. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, and that's the beauty. You get to choose, right? You get to pick, and I liked, thank you for sharing about that aspect. You said your mom grew up in an orphanage, and she didn't have the so-called society-defined mom and dad figure to, you know, have as role models for, right?
Right.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
you I also wanna expand that sometimes in life, it's not necessary the actual parents as figures as role model 'cause they don't have access to that because of the situation.
Mhm.
And that touches on, my question about how do we help others and offer support if anyone's experiencing self-doubt?
So important. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and because
In the
they might not
Bible,
have that to reach out,
right.
right? Yeah,
Right. Yeah. And my mother did have some of that. In the bipolar therapist, I write about two mentors
yeah.
that were very important in my mother's life. And one of them helped her get a scholarship for college.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was one of the trustees at the orphanage.
and that's why I think it's so important. no matter where you are in life, there's always something a bit to be able to help others. It doesn't matter if it's this or this, you just
Right,
want
right,
help. And then again, I stress always like mentorship is so important. You just never know, right? You're changing
right.
by
Yeah,
by sharing some experiences and stuff like that. So I think I think you are very resilient and you do push through because you didn't really give up. Of course, we're humans. We need support, somebody there to be there for us, but you kind of just keep going.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And hence, leading to here, we're having this talk together, right? So I think that's really, it's really beautiful. And what do you have to say about I know you had mentioned like trust that you will get married, right? Because there was a phase where like, how is it possible? How is it possible?
Right.
How
Yeah,
does that
yeah.
become possible? Like, is there anything maybe you could share?
It was. You mentioned mentors, and I had mentors that helped me. I write about them in the bipolar therapist also.
Yeah.
Mentors were coworkers, and my good friends were like me. They were single and dating. I call them in nowhere relation, going nowhere relationship dating.
Oh, yeah. It's
Pining after the men that don't want commitment and finding fault with the ones that did. Birds of a feather flock together. And but I also, when I was the director of a family service agency, one of my board members became a mentor. I don't know if she even knew she was a mentor, but she was telling me how she met her husband, and this is going to sound strange to people who well, like me, I think we grow up and we don't have role models for good marriage. We think it's a fairy tale kind of situation where everything should be perfect and you don't have to put any energy into it. And this man will satisfy your every whim. And so that was my picture of marriage. It was either that way or else nothing. It was no good if he exhibited any kind of selfishness or whatever. They could be good overall people, but everybody has their little faults. But for me, that was bye bye. Okay, that was it. So anyway, so I have this mentor um, who may not know she's a mentor, but she told me, she said, "I'm not in love with my husband, but I'm very fond of him." And I thought, wow, what a concept, fond of, because I was in love at least several times, that was a fantasy. It wasn't real, you know. But this is real, when someone says they're in love, I don't know what that means. For me, it's probably like a low grade psychosis, because it wasn't the real person. It was what I was imagining or hoping for.
yeah,
So
and
the real person, if you're fond of your husband, boy, that's good. You know, of course you have the love underneath it all, but
yeah.
you're not like totally
That
intoxicated every moment
that's
for
funny
sure.
because maybe the husband says the same for the wife. So likewise in a relationship, yeah. It's
Right.
definitely what
Yeah, like we don't have any faults, right? We're perfect.
that's right, right?
Yeah, yeah.
As human beings. So yeah, and I think that's what it yeah, that's an interesting part. And you said she said, "I'm not fond of my husband,
No,
but
I am fond.
I
I'm
am
not
fine."
in love. I'm
Love,
not in
not in
love with
love.
my
Okay.
husband.
That's
I'm
what it was. Yeah.
very fond of him. Very fond.
That's
Yeah.
very it's actually very true in some respect because people fall in love and that sensation of, lovey-dovey phase, it's gonna
Yes.
fade away, right? It's
Right.
like
That's right.
chemicals,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, she'd been married for years. She had two children, and by then.
Yeah. And then it kind of becomes, I think what I've observed and here is that, people become like friends or like roommates, right? Because then
Well, I like it beyond roommates because I think the sexual and romantic part is
yeah.
really important, for staying bonded.
Exactly, and that's exactly what your book and talks about, right? About how to maintain a marriage, right? Having those weekly check-ins, right? Kind of
Right.
thing, so that you guys are on the same page. And I think if more people did that, their perhaps their situation of marriage and relationship would be in a more harmonizing state rather than just evolving to roommate or two people under the same roof. and then not speaking and lacking
Yeah.
that other additional layer that keeps them, as a married couple or, partnership or some sort of thing, right? So, but yeah, so that's interesting. You have to go through all the, was it the frogs before you
Yeah,
find
you
the.
have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. Right,
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. So no, thank you for sharing that. So it is possible, and I think it's yeah, definitely read Marcia Naomi Berger's book, because in it there's, you see her stories. I call it adventures. Yeah, there is definitely adventures over there that most women can relate to in their journey of dating and whatnot, kind of relationship, and then just really knowing yourself and then seeing clearly what aligns with you, those values, right? So I
Right.
like that. Thank you for that. So yeah, and who should read your book? So let's talk about the bipolar therapist first. Yeah.
Okay, so who's the audience for the bipolar therapist?
Yeah.
Uh, the first audience that I try to are people who are going through a mental illness so that they can know that they're not alone. Because in the bipolar therapist, I write very descriptively about what I went through when I was manic, how I behaved, what I said to people, what I was thinking, um, probably, yeah, and how people reacted to me. And I don't think people should have to go through this alone. I know that other people go through similar, not exactly the same, but their own way of acting in ways that are not sane, basically, at times. And then again, there are also the family members and friends of people who have a mental illness. And almost everybody has that somewhere in their family or among their friends. And again, I believe that my book can help them gain understanding and acceptance, and also to know that they're not alone, that other people go through this and they get through it. And there's also help available. There, there are organizations that support both the people with mental illness and also with the family members and friends of people, even coworkers, everybody. It becomes much like a bigger circle around for the person that has the disorder or the illness, and then it's all the different people that can be affected and that they relate to.
Yeah. And yeah, so
Oh, and
it's
also therapists. Therapists
therapist.
should read this because I have a friend from way back who also didn't know I was on lithium when we were friends.
Yeah.
And he's also one of the endorsers of my book. He's on the psychiatrist, Saul Gorman. And he said that also he had no idea that it was I was going through it. And I said, well, do you know any other books where people write about their just what they went through when they were psychotic? And he said no. So I want people to be able to know, and there may be books, but he hadn't heard of them, and I haven't seen any either. That well, actually, there's one where he does write about some of his behaviors, like walking around naked down a country road when he was manic. So, but the extent that I went through mine, and it's very visual. You can
Yes.
imagine it. Yeah.
Yes. And no, I think that's great. And I also believe that this book is also beneficial for anybody that isn't experiencing these challenges or have someone close by or know someone that is experiencing. It's for anybody to learn about what goes on, right? So beyond just
Yes. Yeah.
bipolar, BIOP, like BIPOLA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also, I think it does have appeal for around the people in the dating arena, and because that does describe some of my dating relationship and how I ended up with the man that I did end up marrying, and the kind of like that. Well, this is for people who do have a mental illness. Like, when do you tell somebody? So you can read about when I decided that it was time to share it with somebody
Yeah.
who and also the mother-daughter conflict,
Mhm.
that's pretty prominent in some places in the book also. And daughters, mothers, they're always things, I guess. Mine included a period of estrangement when I blamed her for my first hospitalization. And there's a lot of that goes on too.
Yeah, so I really think it's very beneficial and helpful just to have a glimpse to know that somebody out there, having these experiences, although the exact circumstances are different, and then how they
Yes.
navigate, and then that you can evolve from that situation kind of thing. And it doesn't always have to be the same. And then that I think the book also gives the audience hope, right? We don't have to be,
Yes.
but there is hope all over the place, in different circumstances, situation, whether it's, relations between mom, dad, sister, and then yourself, your dating, your friends, your colleagues, your work, and your career. It's just very intricate, expansive, and very yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in there. Yeah. So thank you
Thank you.
very much
Yeah.
for writing
And
this.
as you're talking about the different mental health challenges, I'm also realizing that people may be inspired, regardless of what their challenge is. I mean, we who love to read, let's say, I don't know, not everybody loves to read, but I love to read. I love to read books that one way or another I think are going to make me a better person, more compassionate and more humane, and compassionate for ourselves also. When
Yeah.
we read what other people are going through, it kind of can help us put in perspective what we are going through. And it doesn't have to be a mental illness. We all have challenges. Everybody's got something, or we
Yep.
wouldn't be here probably.
Yep. It's true. It's just part of being a human in this globe that we share. There's always something going on, right? So yeah. So I'm just yeah, I'm glad that you read the book. So everybody can check this book out because there's lots of situations and stories and journeys that Marcia Naomi Berger has taken so that we can, maybe take away with something from it, right? So I just wanted to ask you, how do we get a copy book? And yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and
All
your
right.
favorite
You can
projects.
get it at all the usual places, certainly online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
Right.
You can ask your bookstore for it. Support your, oh yes, bookshop.org.
Yeah.
That helps the independent bookstores.
Okay.
And of course you can ask your library for it. I love having it in libraries. Some people who may not feel like they're in a position to buy the book can still read the book. So you can help other people by asking your library for it.
That's amazing. And you can gift someone this book too. Or you get a book and then you share it. Yeah, which is great
Right.
because the message is being shared. The stories are there to empower you, right? And it creates hope. Always comes back down to hope. So we mentioned your other books about marriage minded and marriage meeting for lasting love, possibly later in the summertime or fall, like, perhaps we can do yeah, we can chat further on those topics. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
That'd be amazing. And then yeah, so I do want to thank you so much again for your time. I know we kind of started off a little bit later, but that's still amazing. Loved your book, loved our conversations, honest, truthful conversations here. And I hope all the audiences that have tuned in to watch our talk here and listen to the podcast is able to take away something or bring something to somebody else. So that's what her stories is Untold is about. So thank you very much once again, Naomi, for your
And
time.
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Trey. I loved our conversation too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So please take care and bye for now. I'll be sharing the links to your projects to the book as well after when yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye for now.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.